Meals from those years are hard to forget. It was all white bread and whole milk, hamburger casseroles and quiche Lorraines, all with a side of cigarettes. We ate salads as desserts. We knew a party was classy if it had a cheese log, and we never missed an after-dinner smoke. It didn't matter if we were in our dining rooms, a burger joint, or the ritziest of restaurants. There'd be an ashtray on every table, and that very particular flavor in every meal. We smoked for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. It's amazing that our food could taste like anything else. If that was you then, get your lungs screened now. Surviving lung cancer starts with a scan. Learn more at screenyourlungs.org. This PSA was made possible by industry funding and guidance from lung cancer patient groups.
WBSM presents The Ken Pittman Show. Streaming live on WBSM.com and the WBSM app. Call 508-996-0500. Now, Ken Pittman.
We are back in the saddle. Thanks for listening this morning. Beautiful, beautiful morning here on the south coast of Massachusetts. And wow, what a fast-moving world it is. The trial in New York of Donald Trump ends with all 34 counts. That next to nobody who is a legal scholar that is commenting on understands completely why these charges were brought up, were successfully, there were successful convictions for now. I mean, of course, the appellate court, I can almost guarantee yet, although, you know, it's a strange time to be an American. I can't imagine the appellate court judges not reversing these things. But it has galvanized both sides here. I mean, the Trump haters are celebrating, and the Trump supporters are digging in and more committed than ever. And I think the 34-0, the aesthetics of that has turned some people off. And I think that those who feel he's being persecuted by the establishment, I think that those ranks are growing. And of course, there is an element of those who were waiting it out. All right, now he's convicted. I can't vote for him. That's just who I am. You'll have some of that. But the byproduct of this makes it one of the most interesting election seasons in recent memory, if not for many, many decades. But you are looking at a Biden campaign that is basically now, between now and November, they're going to try to win by reminding you of the bad memories of the Trump presidency. Which, no matter who you are, left, right, center, it should be a red flag, because they're not running on what they've done. I mean, everything Biden says he's accomplished are just laughable lies that have already been debunked. I mean, the White House they've got to go back, and when he makes a speech, they have to correct him the next day in very painful ways, publicly. And for the president to stamp a flag in the ground and claim the territory of 11 million jobs created by him after the people returned to work from the COVID shutdown, it is just a joke. And unfortunately for President Biden, too many people are well aware of how things were prior to his taking the Oval Office compared to how it is now. And not just here. Look at the fires that have started around the world with no diplomacy, with no sense of leadership, with no proactive measures by the United States. When you look at Ukraine, when you look at Israel, when you look at Africa, all these things are happening. China is, according to reports, about to invade Taiwan. Russians are winning the proxy wars in Africa. America's getting the boot from a lot of places in Africa. You had Israel in an international court at Netanyahu. Now there's warrants out for him from an international court that the U.S. mainly finances. And very quietly, there's a big problem going on with what NATO's deciding to do in terms of arming Ukraine. They're now allowing Ukraine to use weapons coming from America to launch and to use inside Russia. That is a precursor you don't want to think about how if it gets any further. That would make supply lines from the Americans across the Atlantic, that would make these legitimate war targets if you're being completely unbiased. I mean, in World War II, we were bombing factories of civilians because they were manufacturing for the Nazi army, right? Even in residential neighborhoods. So if Russia sees weapons coming from the United States over the Atlantic that are coming to kill Russians, you could make the argument those are legitimate military targets, which then would, of course, force the United States to act in kind. In other words, you're looking at a higher risk to World War III. And it's just amazing, right? I mean, instead of the Nazis and the Japanese, we're looking at the Russians, a bigger foe than Germany and obviously more powerful with their nuclear arsenal, and China, who has been leeching off of the capitalist areas of Asia while seizing control from the Brits. They're using that capitalist sector to enhance the communist power, and they've created an incredible military where they were just a regional power. Now they're a global power, on track to surpass the United States in a lot of areas that was almost unthinkable 25 years ago. And people, when Reagan was elected back in 1980, if you're old enough to remember, the Democrats are promising, well, this guy's going to drag us right into World War III. This is a warmonger. And what did he do? Well, he used the capitalist powers to rebuild the U.S. military, and in 6 years, completely surpassed the larger military of the Russians with a more modern and superior military that the Russians couldn't ever beat in a conventional war. And so they disarmed. They knocked the wall down. They said, you know what? We're not going to beat them. Let's join them. Became part of the international community once again without a shot being fired. Well, outside of the proxies that both were using, relatively nonviolent way to destroy the Soviet Union. But the Russians are Russians. The Cossacks are Cossacks. They're still in power. The agreements the West made with the Soviet Union are now being broken and violated, much like, you can compare this to the Native American tribes who were pushed further west and further west. The NATO promise was to never encroach towards Russia, and they're encroaching towards Russia. And I look at Joe Biden in particular, specifically, wanting to be the point man for the Obama administration in Ukraine. And as soon as he got that job, he gets his son and his son's partner big jobs at Burisma Holdings, a major energy company that fracks and gets natural gas and oil out of the ground. They're now in Mexico and other places in different names. They've broken up the company Burisma Holdings, and it's in different names, but they're still there. And when you look at Hunter Biden, Devin Archer, both getting $83,000 a month for jobs they weren't qualified for. And then Mitt Romney's national security advisor, former CIA station chief, Cofer Black, on the same board of directors. Putin was getting poked in the chest. We're taking this stuff that was once yours. Because, of course, the Russians were getting kickbacks from the Ukrainians. The pro-Russian president, prior to Zelensky, was emplaced by the color revolution, it was called, that the U.S. orchestrated. They threw out a democratically elected president. We're not supposed to do that. Because he was more pro-Russian than pro-West. And Obama didn't like it. And once that happened, what did we see? Well, a month later, Russia invaded Crimea, took the section to the southeast of Ukraine, controls it today. They backed off. The Obama administration didn't give any weapons to Ukraine. It was the Trump administration that began getting weapons over to Ukraine so they could deter tanks and things like that from the Russians coming over and doing this again. And Joe Biden gets elected. What do? They surround Ukraine. They invade. There are more fires in this world because of Joe Biden, because of the lack of leadership and capability. They're going to be hard to extinguish all of them, for sure. But you can guarantee, if you get a fireman with matches and you expect him to put out the fire instead of doing what he should have already done, then I don't know what you expect him to do the next 4 years. It's going to be more of the same. Look at Massachusetts, look at Washington. All they're looking to do is tax more. We brought in, now it's like we're hearing 12 million since Joe Biden has been president. 12 million. That's almost twice the population of Massachusetts that have come into this country illegally. One thing about Trump, I hate when he speaks ad lib, because it's just low-hanging fruit for his detractors. And it was kind of funny yesterday. He gets to the podium. We've got people who, his crossing the border. We don't know where they're from. They're coming from places we don't know about. They're speaking languages nobody ever heard of. When he said that, I got to say, that's, congratulations if you don't like him, because you're going to use that. When he tries to make a point and he ad-libs, it's awful. Come on, if we're being honest. But he came to the podium to talk about the trial, and the first thing out of his mouth was about the border. Which is probably, there's some intelligent reason to do that, because it's the biggest reason to get rid of Biden right now. So he started with that. But I can almost guarantee you, I can't guarantee you because I don't trust anything anymore, really, but I can almost guarantee you the appellate court is going to reverse all this. It's it's one of the biggest farces I've ever witnessed. Never seen anything like it. 508-996-0500. Ryan is in the studio early today. My man, what's happening?
I know, you woke me up, Ken.
I did?
Yeah.
Oh, you sounded awake.
I got home at 4:30 this morning.
What?
From work.
Oh, you weren't out drinking?
Nah.
Okay.
Nope, not today.
How are you?
I'm doing all right. I got cleared for regular duty as of Thursday.
Are your back's doing well?
Yeah, trying to at least.
Do you go to chiropractor?
Yeah, I've been.
Tim Crabb.
I went 3 times, I think.
He's outstanding.
My last one's next Thursday.
Nice.
So.
And it made a difference.
Yeah, you haven't been there.
No, I haven't been in a long time. But I'll tell you, I think he's great. So, Celtics are in the finals.
Yes.
They'll be playing the Dallas Mavericks with a player that was just recently called by one of his teammates as being better than Larry Bird. And who do they face but the very team Larry Bird played for? I think there's going to be some locker room material there.
Yeah, there's a lot of.
Well, Lucic he's a great player.
There's a lot of good matchups there, though, Ken. If you look at it, you're gonna have whenever Dallas gets the ball, you're either gonna have Derek White or Drew Holiday on Luka.
He's a great player. I don't think he's Larry Bird.
No, I don't.
I think that's very premature. He's got a lot of skills, a good balanced game. I mean, Bird was generational, but for Magic Johnson and Michael Jordan, he probably would have MVP how many years? But he just happened to be in a special era, like Ali and Frazier and George Foreman. Sometimes there's a certain era of sports where it's just there's a remarkable pool of talent. DiMaggio, Williams. In the middleweight division, it was Hagler, Duran, Leonard, and Hearns. And I think that's what was witnessed in the 80s, this really remarkable era of talent, generational talent that just was all born around the same time and happened to play in the same league. Celts are in the finals. And
looking for banner 18.
Largely due to a guy I questioned getting the Supermax deal, but he has improved his game mentally and physically. One for him.
Yeah, I have a feeling that if we do win it, Ken, he retires on a high note.
I would say, even though he's in great shape still.
But what if he wants to come back for one more?
Welcome back. I mean, age is just everybody's on their own clock.
Do we have the money to afford him, though?
But between sports medicine, the diet, the knowledge about diet and everything, people, under the right circumstances, should be living longer. Now, the age hasn't, as a whole, we haven't really made a lot of gains because of bad habits. I mean, between murder, between fentanyl and all these other drug problems, and the disparity of resources between the poor and the rich, you do have some people dying relatively young still, and very young still, but if everybody was fully functioning, we'd be living much longer. And it's got to do with genetics, I know. It's got to do with diet and resources, and also discipline, because you have to be willing to eat right. You have to be willing to do the exercise. It can't, just because it's available to you doesn't mean you're going to live longer if you're not doing the things you need to do. But Horford is just another sort of, I don't want to say Tom Brady, but we're seeing athletes play much deeper into their age because of sports medicine, because of the knowledge of how to stay youthful.
Yeah, he's one guy that I think these young guys look up to, kind of.
Yeah.
Because if you look at it, he's
great role model.
He's what, like 37, 38?
Which in the NBA, gosh, that's like Tom Brady being 45, right?
But look at who's another guy that's almost 40 years old. You got LeBron James playing at a high level still.
At that age, he's playing terrific.
And I don't know, and getting to LeBron, I don't know why his son's staying in the NBA draft. He didn't do anything for USC.
It's a mistake, and the Lakers are probably going to take him to keep LeBron there because LeBron sells tickets.
He also had a bad health scare too.
I mean, Ted Williams' son didn't turn out to be a great ball player.
Do we even know who he is, Ken?
Who?
I don't know who Ted Williams' son is.
Yeah, he's the one who ordered Ted Williams' head to get chopped off and keep it in a cryogenic chamber. He's a nut job. He died of cancer a few years later.
Wow.
Yeah, he played in these hanger-on leagues that weren't, They were for people who weren't really going to get a shot, but he still wanted to play ball. It was an oddball, that guy. But I'm saying, just because you have, like Michael Jordan's kids, where are they? Are they in the NBA?
I think one of them's an actor, isn't he?
I don't know. Maybe I couldn't tell you, but it doesn't always translate. It very rarely translates. I mean, the best example I can think of, there's a few, like Mayweather as a fighter, right? Because Roger Mayweather, his dad was a good fighter, not great like him, but you look at Ken Griffey Jr. You know, there's some examples of it, but doesn't often happen.
Yeah, if you look at it, you're talking about Major League Baseball. You got Biggio's kid playing for Toronto. He's an all right ball player. He's not that bad.
Yep. He's not what Biggio was.
No, nobody could be like Craig Biggio can.
How come?
He played two positions.
He hit in Colorado.
Yeah, I know he did.
The ball goes out in Colorado.
He played catcher and second base for.
That was a fun team. Remember the mid to early '90s that Colorado. There was like a softball team. Dante
Bichette. His son plays for Toronto.
Is that right?
Yeah.
So there you go. Another example.
You had Dante Bichette. You had.
But when Colorado first opened its stadium, that was a lot of fun watching baseball there because everybody was knocking home runs out there.
Yeah, you had. Yeah, that Colorado lineup. You had Bichette, Larry Walker, Andres Galarraga, and then Todd Helton after that.
I don't know what the elevation is in Lubbock, Texas. I don't think it's much lower than Colorado. Probably Denver area, but it's got to be lower. But the ball still travels differently. I played in the men's World Championships of softball in I think '96, and I made the unfortunate decision to stay out all night with my
till like 5
with my team captain, and so I played hungover at 8:30 in the morning, and I did not have a good World Championships. But the ball travels differently. I'm like, what is it me or is this thing?
I think it was.
I'm looking at the ball. I'm going, that should be coming down. So imagine when it's like even higher. You know,
I think it was both.
I had friends who played in Colorado numerous times, and they tell you it's crazy how the ball travels. So, but that was fun when it first opened, that Colorado Stadium. That was back when I was young enough, didn't have the responsibilities of being a dad and all the stuff, when I could play the PlayStation and MLB, and it was, I knew all the players because of being a gamer for some reason. Anyway, we're running up to 9:30 in the morning here, so we can talk about the latest in the Karen Reed trial. We'll certainly go over the Trump trial. He's been found guilty on all 34 counts, which I think raises a red flag for a lot of Americans. I think most of us felt he was going to get stuck with at least one of these charges because the way the judge broke it up, it really gave the chances of conviction a much higher probability. But all 34 counts, I think, disturbs a lot of Americans, especially when the last regime, the feds, did not want to charge. They didn't see any charges here. And Bragg comes up with misdemeanors for the most part that had run out the statute of limitations. And he's in court for this, that, and the other thing. I know he's not likable in the minds of so many. I understand why. But you can't do it just because you don't like the guy. They're doing it because of the threat of getting back into the institution they feel they own. And I'm not talking about Democrats. I think there's a lot of Republicans who are in on this as far as the establishment. But it's something that may strangely help Donald Trump get back in the White House. I mean, the way you hear people talking, you see his outing in the Bronx? He had plenty of people out there in the Bronx. That's a no-go zone for most Republicans.
And he was out there.
He was out there and getting cheers and big crowd, diverse crowd. Very, very, very surprised. But I think people have had enough of this particular regime.
And wasn't one of Trump's court appearances? Didn't the Democrats hold a?
Well, when you see Democrats, Robert De Niro
rally like.
Yeah, he's now he's now getting into Susan Sarandon territory, sticking his neck out politically, and it backfired on him. He looked like an idiot. He's F-bombing some guy, and I'm sorry, but I see that's a setting, to be honest with you, when a performer or an athlete makes a statement politically, and it's away from Major League Baseball or the NFL or a concert, and it's on their own, I can respect that a little bit. You still have the First Amendment if you're famous, but when you are a star performer and you have a captive audience who's paid to listen to you sing or play a guitar or whatever it is, right? And then you stop the show and you start stumping your speeches politically, and I think that steals from people the idea that they can escape reality and enjoy a performer or an athlete and the gifts God gave them that they wish they had. Usually people show up because they admire what somebody else can do that you can't do, right? Whether it's to write great music and play it and look good while you're doing it, that's a very rare thing. And then these gifted athletes, Ryan, if you could do what Derek Jeter did, you'd trade that in a minute, wouldn't you? I mean, 99.6% of your ground balls are going to be absolute guaranteed outs. I mean, that's...
Yes.
Who has the eye hand but 1 in a trillion, right, to do something like that? And so, as a former ball player, you admire what the ball players can do. You pay to go see it, right?
Yeah, I used to go to Fenway Park like all the time, Ken, just to see like Ortiz, Pedroia at his size.
Yeah, they can hit 100-mile-an-hour aspirin out of the ballpark on a consistent basis. Who can do that? I mean, you wish you could.
Not me.
Yeah, and so when they, I mean, that's like paying Trump to turn around and start singing karaoke at a political speech. That's not why you're there. But when people pay to get away from reality by going to a ball game, by going to a concert, it shouldn't happen. Like, people just shouldn't steal from like Neil Young, et cetera, things like that. But what Robert De Niro did was on his own. Granted, he's a filmmaker. He doesn't have a captive audience like a concert performer, but he took his shot at going against Trump, and it backfired on him. But at least he did it in a setting where it wasn't forcing people to listen to him, or anything. He could walk away.
Yeah, he was like 3 blocks away from the courthouse.
Yeah, I mean, it's being described as the Biden camp setting up across from the courthouse, which in the minds of some people proves it was political all along. I don't connect the two. I think De Niro just wanted to be part of getting rid of Trump.
Yeah, I think De Niro just wanted to be out there.
Are you talking to me? He has a particular hatred for Trump, like Joy Behar kind of hatred, and a lot of people share it. There's half the country really cannot stand the sight of Trump, the idea of him being in office,
getting back in. They
don't care that his rights are trampled. If they are, I'm not saying they are, but if they are, they don't care. Whatever, get them.
When's the sentencing on that, Ken? It's next week, isn't it?
Yeah. So something's coming up.
It's going to get...
Of course, it's being appealed, and he's going to win the appeal. There's no serious... Did you see this judge? And this guy is a nut job.
Yes, he is.
I mean, he stopped the court. He threw everybody out of the courtroom because the witness for Trump was looking at him and screaming at him, "Are you staring at me? I will have your testimony thrown out," which he can't do. He threw an idle threat to a witness right in front of Alan Dershowitz, one of the great legal minds of our country, who's not a Republican, who was stunned and shocked at the behavior of this judge. And this is a sham trial. There's no doubt in my mind what's going on in Georgia. We basically have a DA who took the case on so that her and a boyfriend could take all that money and go on lavish vacations with it, and this thing's going nowhere. At least not till after the elections now, and I don't think it's going to go anywhere regardless.
Didn't the boyfriend get in trouble too, Ken?
Well, he had to resign.
He had to resign?
Yeah, she threw him $500,000. She'll say, well, not him, his office.
His law office.
Yeah, a married man. They start going down the Caribbean on a regular basis with that money. and they're going on these, not just in the Caribbean, out to Tennessee and other places, really nice vacations. They seem to suddenly enjoy with this wealth. And her excuse was, well, no, I paid him back with cash. Well, if you knew that it doesn't look good if you're using money that you steered to the person, why wouldn't you have receipts? And she said her proof was, I'm telling you. This is a prosecutor who, if she was prosecuting anybody, you're going to say the proof is your testimony? Okay, I'm okay with that? No. I mean, but there's two different rules. There's rules for those who are pro-establishment, and there's rules for people who happen to say, you know what, I'm taking the power away from the establishment. And this confounds me because I think most Americans, before Donald Trump was ever a candidate, we all wanted to see somebody else come in, right? We all wanted a third party. We all thought this binopoly between the Republicans and Democrats in Washington was not good for the country, that they allowed for a level of corruption because they personally benefited from it and nobody could stop them. That's always been a problem. And I've always thought the two-party system works because if you bring in 3, 4, 5, 6 parties, then you're inviting the chance for a radical to take over. And it doesn't matter. Now the radicals are in. I mean, these people who are running the White House right now, when you look at what's happening in the Middle East, when you look at what's happening around the world, like the Biden University of Pennsylvania Center. When Joe Biden left office as the vice president of the Obama administration, he finds himself getting an offer for $1 million a year at the Biden Center in the University of Pennsylvania, where he never has to show up. This center was mostly financed with $54 million of anonymous money coming from China. Anthony Blinken, the Secretary of State, and 9 members of the U.S. National Security Team are on the payroll of this Biden Center, which means they're on the Chinese payroll. And look what's happening now. Did China make a good investment or not? We now are going to be forced to buy electric cars manufactured by China, market dominated by China. We'll be on the outside looking in. China's about to invade Taiwan. Biden will do nothing. He will do nothing. That's going to shrink the Pacific, the avenues of trade, because China will expand their territorial waters, and democracy will erode, and communism will expand. So that's the best $54 million I've ever seen invested. And that's the worst thing about what's happened, and it's not just Democrats, but we're seeing China knows it's not if they can be bribed, but it's how much. And they've been at it. Remember Al Gore? Not to pick on Democrats in particular, because like I said, I can point to some Republican stuff. I mean, Jeb Bush, he got it like $125 million before anybody was even a serious contender back in 2016. And a lot of it came from Chinese intelligence front companies. But Al Gore got caught accepting money from China. And his excuse was, well, when they talked about money, I was in the bathroom because I had drinking iced tea a lot that day. That was his excuse. The media didn't question it, didn't want to question it, because he's their guy. That's Clinton administration part 2. And it probably has been going on earlier, but this is when we first started seeing it. Steady flow of Chinese money influencing American politics. And nobody seems interested in stopping it, except for one guy who's rude when treated rudely, and that's too much for people. 508-996-0500. We'll come back in just a moment. You are listening to the Ken Pittman Show on AM 1420 WBSM. I'd love to hear from you. 508-996-0500.
Pittman He's the Ken Pittman Show on 1420 WBSM.
Can I touch you? Are you out of touch? I guess I never noticed that much. Uranium lover, I'm live on your wire. Ooh, come and take
Brian,
that.
what the hell is a geranium lover?
What?
That's somebody who likes plants? And the cards are weird. I love them, but they're weird.
Where you getting this from, Ken?
That's right there in the lyrics. Pay attention. Who's
Sorry,
that?
I didn't have my headphones on, buddy.
You're on the air. Hello there.
Oh, yeah. Hey, Ken. Hey, I heard you talking about China there. And you remember, it goes all the way back to Richard Nixon, and he was doing his détente with China.
Well, yeah. You could say it started with China, but I don't think that the design to have China exploit us was with Richard Nixon. He was basically looking to make inroads with Russia's greatest ally, and he saw a market that could benefit the American people if under the right management.
Well, that's kind of the way it was spun, but the reality is, and I've talked to a whole bunch of China scholars about this.
You talked to a bunch of Chinese scholars. You know a bunch of Chinese scholars?
I've called a bunch of shows on this issue for the last few years. It's whether or not.
Well,
China
who?
is
Like, give me an
really-
example. Who's the Chinese scholar that you spoke to?
Well, there were a couple of NPR shows. There was a show in, I think it was in Santa Cruz. They had a woman who was not only Chinese, but she had been studying. Well, I'll show you the point I'm trying to go at. Is whether or not China is really just a rental ground for sweatshops. And that the reason why Richard Nixon wanted to do the détente with China was they wanted to move American factories to where it's cheap. And whether or not the so-called communists in China accepted the idea that all of these jobs would be going over there and sapping America, you know, the old idea that...
But why would they need China at that point? Because they had the cheap sweatshops in Japan, and Japan was keeping up with manufacturing. It's like you're not allowing for the given explanation that we're trying to make inroads with Russia's greatest ally, and we see potential with the largest population in the world. We see potential for an American market to thrive. I mean, that you don't buy that for a second, it seems.
Well, if they used to get $20 an hour for steel making in Pittsburgh, but Japan was going to do it for 25 cents an hour, and then China was going to do it for 3 cents an hour. Even though they got to haul it 6,000 miles across the ocean to get it back and forth, that's, the difference between $20 an hour and 3 cents an hour.
And it only works long term if you have a population under lock and gun, which China does.
Well, and that gets into whether or not China is actually communist. Whether they're just pretending to be communist, but in reality they're a sweatshop rental ground that would be called a corporate state. And so the idea that the corporate state has taken on the name of communism, but they're really just a bunch of fleecers.
But in the 50s and 60s, how many millions of people were murdered in China in the name of communism, in the name of the cause? I mean, you think that was faked?
Well, you're talking 40 years earlier.
I understand, but this is the same powers. It's the same regime. It's the same totalitarian state that has leached. It has leached off of the capitalist sector, right down in the south, the Thailand, and I mean they've leached off of Hong Kong, which finances their communist and prolongs the communist regime, because without the capitalist sector, they couldn't maintain that level of power.
Well, I'm just telling you that it's fake communism.
I mean, what are you basing that on? I'd like you to name for me one of the bunches of scholars that you spoke to. Just one. Give me one name of somebody I can
I'd
reference.
Have to look it up. This was probably 3 years ago, but it was an NPR show, and they had a round table of what was going on with all of the, for example, the pollution in China. Now, the idea that you remember maybe probably before COVID, there were all of these famous photographs of the air pollution in China, in downtown China. And then, people were dropping dead. They had to wear like layers of masks just to walk to the grocery store. And if it was a real communist country, they would look out for their people. But they're really looking out for their corporate masters who are bringing jobs to China, but they're poisoning the place so badly that, well, that's when COVID showed up, that the air pollution got so bad that the bats were metastasizing a brand new disease, and that became COVID.
Well, let me ask you this. What was a real communist regime?
Well, it depends on what you call communism, but not Ho Chi Minh, it was Mao Zedong, right?
Was the Soviet Union real or was it fake?
What got started ended up with Stalin, and Stalin was so corrupt that his kids were put in prison for stealing the royal jewels.
But I mean, you remember the bread lines in the Soviet Union? People had to wait in line just for bread.
Right.
But the politicians would drive by them in limousines on the way to these nice banquets with opulent food and lifestyle. Is there really any true form of communism with human nature?
Well, that's kind of the point that I'm calling on. We're allowing Chinese to be sweatshop slaves. They think they've got some freedom, but they're getting, I don't know what it's coming to now, 9 cents an hour. And
well,
not that,
I understand, but we also are witnessing a much better lifestyle by the Chinese people. Well, I mean, they're living in apartments with modern amenities and all these things. They're able to buy gadgets and all these things that they weren't able to do before. So there's some of that as well, a growing middle class, if you will, if that's even a thing.
Well, I don't really want to talk communism theory, but the idea that communism got started on the idea of looking out for the poor working guy, and the working guy in China is getting 3 cents an hour and poisoned by the worst pollution in the world. So it's is that communism?
Well, in capitalism, with capitalism, you had sweatshops, you had people exposed to chemicals for centuries, or a couple at least, in the industrial age, right? The 19th and 20th centuries, capitalist countries exploited cheap labor where they could and exposed people to dangerous chemicals if they weren't going to get caught.
Right, and Trump is trying to do the same thing again.
How?
But,
How?
Well, he wants to get rid of the EPA. I mean, good God, you look.
No, he wants to reform the EPA, right? I mean, don't you think the EPA?
He wants to get rid of science.
I'm sorry, but the EPA has come up with some really radical practices and some questionable things, like we're going to force ourselves into the electric car without knowing what to do as far as the disposal of these vehicles, without having any plan to get in on the advantage of manufacturing these things. I mean, we're going to be on the outside looking in, but when these cars die off, they're very hazardous materials. What then? What's the EPA's position?
Well,
it's better?
I can't remember how old you are, but I'm old enough to remember when people generally went about a half mile away from their house to get to work. By the late 90s, it had turned into 20 miles round trip, or 20 miles each way, 40 miles round trip. So the idea that the average human is spending a huge amount of money to get to a job that's so far away that they got to spend 10, 15% of their paycheck on gasoline, instead of having mass transit, instead of being able to walk a half mile.
Mass transit, that is a money loser, right? I mean, the Amtrak is an annual loser. The MBTA is the worst run train system in the country. Constant delays, constant breakdowns. I mean, it's not ideal. I mean, and during COVID, you didn't want anybody in mass transit. You wanted to keep everybody away from each other. The defund the police movement has made it much more dangerous to even go into a subway station. And ask any New Yorker about that.
Well, I don't want to get too sidetracked about whether or not making sure that we don't become addicted to Saudi Arabian oil, and that.
Why do we need to be addicted to Saudi Arabian oil? We have more than them.
Well, the idea of becoming a colony And putting all our eggs in one basket is not considered a conservative place to be.
Well, right. So that's why nobody wants to be forced to get rid of one type of vehicle and forced into another kind that's not even going to be as useful or inexpensive. So, I mean, you talk about choice, you talk about capitalism. We're banning motor vehicles that run on fossil fuels by what, 2035 in Massachusetts?
Well, I'm the guy that calls from California.
I know.
I'm out in San Francisco. We have biodiesel. We don't even use diesel in our buses anymore, and we probably haven't for 15 years. Mm-hmm. We have so many restaurants out here that there's plenty of grease and plenty of vegetable matter to make biodiesel. And so the few buses that do run on diesel run on biodiesel. We
Wait a minute.
A lot of electricity.
You think you're saying that America can run on restaurant grease?
America. Well, you go to each region has its advantages. You go to North Dakota. North Dakota has so much wind they could power the entire United States every day with the amount of wind that they've got. The only trouble is how do you transport the wind to New York City from North Dakota or L.A.? But honest to God, they get so much wind.
Well, what about I agree, and you could actually put 100 square miles of solar panels in Death Valley and run the United States pretty much electric free, right? But you're right, the transfer of it.
How come they don't put solar panels on every roof? It would pay. There are different cons that are going on. I don't know if you've got public power in New Bedford, but there are different. I think Los Angeles has public power, and the city, the taxpayers own the power company, and then
we have some. I think Middleborough, a nearby town, has that. There's some of that.
Right. So the idea that they could abandon the coal-fired plants and just pay people to put solar panels up on their roof, and they would produce so much, and there are different kinds of
but just not to cut you off, but you realize we are going more and more solar, more and more wind, and we're guaranteeing, we know this, that the electrical rates are going to go up as a result.
That's phony economics.
Well, that's the formula here. I mean, and Deval Patrick, the liberal Democratic governor, forced us into it, and that's how we're going to have to live with it soon.
Well, somebody suckered somebody because it should be.
I agree.
With supply and demand, the more you put up there, the fewer addictions you have to the expensive stuff.
I agree. I got a news break. I got to break off to. I appreciate it, and I appreciate the knowledge from you and your bunches of Chinese scholars that went on unnamed, but always appreciate the conversation. We'll be back in just a few moments. You are listening to The Ken Pittman Show with Ryan Dixon, who's reading the paper because he's particularly bored with the conversation. I'm just glad this isn't a TV show, Ryan.
WBSM and W258DR, New Bedford, a Town Square media station.